so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, finds till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, darkness fades into new beginnings as we lift our eyes to a hope beyond. All creation waits with an expectation to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one has overcome.
For fear
And for every fear there's an empty grave, for the risen one has overcome. Now the silence breaks in the name of Jesus, as the heavens cry, let the earth respond. All creation shouts with a voice of triumph to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one has overcome.
For fear
And for every fear there's an empty grave, for the risen one has overcome. He shall reign forever, strongholds now surrender, for the Lord our God has overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus our defender, He is Lord and He has overcome. He shall reign forever, strongholds now surrender, for the Lord our God has overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus our defender, He is Lord and He has overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one has overcome.
For fear
And for every fear there's an empty grave, for the risen one has overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the risen one has overcome. I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry us all unite to sing, God is love. Let heaven and earth their praises bring, God is love. Let every soul from sin awake, each in his heart sweet music make, and sing with us for Jesus' sake, for God is love. God is love. God is love. Come, let us all unite to sing that God is love. Oh, tell to earth's remotest bound, God is love. In Christ we have redemption found, God is love. His blood has washed our sins away, His Spirit turned our night to day, and now we can rejoice to say that God is love. God is love. God is love. Come, let us all unite to sing that God is love. How happy is our portion here, God is love. His promises our spirits cheer, God is love. He is our sun and shield by day, our help, our hope, our strength and stay. He will be with us all the way, our God is love. God is love. God is love. Come, let us all unite to sing that God is love. God is love. God is love. Come, let us all unite to sing that God is love.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good to see everybody here. I know that Brunkard is just kind of wandering around doing his Brunkard thing. Probably not. Good to see everyone here. In a minute, George is going to lead us in prayer. Wanted to give you guys an update if you hadn't seen already. Larry Franks did make it home, but his blood pressure continues to dip and dive, so keep Larry in your prayers. Met with it and sat with Agnes a little bit on Monday. She's doing much better. She's got some doctor's appointments this week that she's got. I think Randall said Thursday and Friday. Does that sound right? But just pray for her so her spirits can stay up. She's just recovering from everything that's going on while she was in the hospital. And she wants to come. Oh, yeah. So keep her in your prayers. And keep Randall in your prayers. Because apparently at 5:30 in the morning, Agnes is, she wants things done a certain way. And Randall's getting used to that right now. I don't know if Randall's ever been bossed around before. So it might be good for him on that. So we'll turn it over to George and he'll lead us in prayer. Oh, wait, Kathy.
Angie knew
Oh, thank you. Yeah, let's keep Angie in our prayers also she had a stroke.
that's a bad situation.
Yeah. Okay, so we're finding ourselves in Numbers chapter 20 tonight. If you want to turn over there, we'll be spending some time there along with some other scriptures. Want to encourage everybody to read Numbers 21 through 25 in preparation for our time together next Wednesday. That'll be the plan. But before we get into class and discussion, I wanted to ask you guys, I like starting my Wednesday night classes with a question that helps our brains kind of get back into motion, especially after we've spent either all day working or napping, depending on whether we're retired or not. But let's start by just having a conversation of what do you guys think are the hardest times to stay focused on Christ? When do you find it hardest to be in submission and obedient? When I'm teaching? Is that what you said, Mark? No. Oh. Well, you pointed at me.
When things are real good.
When things are good. All right? Do we agree that when things are going well, our focus can slip, maybe not paying as much attention? Okay. Anything else? Say it again, George.
When you're away from the body, the fellowship, when you're away.
Even are you saying for a short time or an extended time? Or just both? Okay, so when you're away from the body, away from the support system that's there, the fellowship, okay. Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to piggyback on. I mean, even, if I'm just at work and away from the believers in my family here, it's harder to focus on things, on God and godly things.
Okay.
I've got everything else trying to take my attention away, and all these other people focused on the same thing, but they're going about it in not necessarily a godly way. It's easy to get swept up down that path.
Sure. Okay. Anybody else? Kathy?
I was just going to say, when you're trying to make a big decision that you don't know which way it's supposed to go, and you got all these ideas thinking this is what I want, then that somebody else in the situation wants something else.
Okay. All right.
And it's hard to focus and just say, God, take it over, but I'm telling you, when you do,
Especially when you're a control freak, right, Kathy?
like both of us.
Oh, Bill, you're not?
He is about certain things.
If in case you missed that, this was Kathy going,
This is an example. He said, I could sell all my furniture to everybody that wants it. No problem, we don't have to carry it. And I said, what about then she can have your lawnmower if she wants it. No.
Hey, you can get rid of my chair, but you ain't getting rid of my lawnmower. Okay, there's a huge difference between furniture and lawnmower, all right? Okay.
Being demanding, I just said no.
Anybody else? When do we find it hardest to focus, to stay obedient, to be in submission to God?
Well, I think sometimes, and it's kind of where Daniel was at work, but sometimes when you're really busy on trying to accomplish something and you've got your mind on it and you're really not paying attention to other things that's going on around you that you need to listen to try to get involved maybe with a spiritual conversation, and you miss those conversations because you're so focused on other things.
Okay, just distracted.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Being distracted.
Chris?
Same, just when you're too busy.
Too busy. And life is just crazy. Dodie, why are you shaking your head?
I'm behind the wheel of the car or truck. That's a good one.
Especially when everybody's driving skills are obviously subpar to mine, not yours, to mine, right?
I can turn Mike's trailer around on a one-way road without getting.
Well, I know, you do that really well, right? Brunkart's an amazing driver. He can just switch that thing around on a one-way and he'll be good to go. We'll come back to that question, I think, because it has a lot of bearing on what we read happening in Numbers chapter 20. So understand, once we hit Numbers chapter 20, that wilderness period is done. We're about ready to start turning north, or Israel, I should say, is about ready to start turning north and begin that trek to the promised land. So now what we've gotten not only to the end of this time frame, but to the end of that punishment period, because remember, who has to fall in the wilderness before they can go and enter the promised land? You guys remember?
All of the adults
all that generation has to fall. Anyone that is 20 or older, or I should say it'd be 21 and older, is going to fall in the desert in order for the generation that is 20 and younger that God has spared and said is going to shepherd and be in the wilderness are going to be able to take possession of the promised land. So that means at this point, while we haven't really heard anything about it, almost an entire generation has died at this point. Okay, you go back to Numbers 14. Let's read it again just so that we have it fresh in our mind, because I have a question for you, and I think I have an answer, but I'd like to see what you guys think on it too. Numbers 14. I know we keep reading this thing, but it had so much bearing to do with tonight and last week. But Numbers 14, we'll start in verse 28. It says, "Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will surely do to you. Your corpses shall fall in this wilderness, even all your numbered men, according to your complete number, from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. Surely you shall not come into the land in which I swore to settle you, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. Your children, however, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them in, and they shall know the land which you have rejected. But as for you, your corpses shall fall in this wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness, and they shall suffer for your unfaithfulness until your corpses lie in the wilderness." So we have reached the end of that period. But as I was reading through this again, a question came to my mind, so I want to see what you guys think. Does this decree that I just read in Numbers 14 apply to Moses and Aaron? Otis, you say yes? Why do you say yes?
Because they don't make it in.
Well, we know they're not. We're going to get there, but let's pretend we haven't read Numbers 20 yet. And we were just reading Numbers 14. Does that decree apply to Moses and Aaron?
If you're going by the age, it's true.
Bill says if we're going by the age requirement, yes, it does apply to Moses and Aaron. Chris, you're nodding your head. Why are you saying yes? We'll get to the no's here in a second.
The same age.
The age bracket thing. Yes, ma'am.
I'm saying that, no, they weren't included because they weren't unfaithful.
Okay. All right, so let's do it. We know what happens in Numbers 20, okay? And we'll get there here in a second. But I want to kind of hammer this thing out to make sure that we're understanding everything that's going on here. There was an exception to God's decree in Numbers 14. Who were the exception? Caleb and Joshua. That first, if God wanted this decree to not apply to Moses and Aaron, wouldn't he have said Caleb, Joshua, Moses, and Aaron? But then we look at what's in Deuteronomy chapter 1. Let's turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 1 real quick. Because in Deuteronomy is, of all of the first 5 books of the Bible, Deuteronomy is probably my favorite, because it's Moses' declaration and speech to the people before they're going to cross into the promised land. So it's his last hoorah that he's presenting to the people. But in Deuteronomy chapter 1, can we get somebody to read 34 through 40 of Deuteronomy chapter 1?
When the Lord heard what you said, he was angry and solemnly swore, "No one from this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to give your ancestors, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh." Sounds good. "He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land he set his feet on, because he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. Because of you, the Lord became angry with me also and said, 'You shall not enter it either. But your ancestors, Joshua, son of Nun, will enter it. Encourage him, because he will lead Israel to inherit it. And the little ones that you said would be taken captive, your children, who do not yet know good from bad, they will enter the land. I will give it to them, and they will take possessions of it. But as for you, turn around and set out toward the desert along the route of the Red Sea.
All right, so Moses is giving a recap of everything that's going on here. And this section that he's talking about is that period of history where the spies get sent into Canaan and they return, and we talked about that already, and they listen to the facts of the case, and they agree with the perspective of the 10 that this is an impossible task, right? And what does Moses tell us here in Deuteronomy 1 that isn't revealed, that he doesn't reveal to us in Numbers chapter 14? Say again, George? That he is excluded also. Look at what it says there, just one more time. Verse 37, the Lord was angry with me on your account and said, not even you shall enter there. So I'm convinced, at least at this point, that Moses wasn't getting into the promised land because of the decree of the age bracket and the generation that had to fall in the wilderness. Plus, God told him he would not enter, that Joshua would be the one to take over and lead the people in. And Moses' job from that point on was to encourage Joshua and get him ready to lead the people into Canaan. So whether or not, and this is what I find fascinating, we know what happened, but whether or not they had been disobedient in Numbers chapter 20 isn't keeping them out of the promised land or putting them into the promised land. Okay? They weren't getting in anyway, because they were a part of that generation that had to fall in the wilderness. So that brings us into Numbers chapter 20. Now understand, I think Moses and Aaron have jobs that they're supposed to be accomplishing before they die. We'll see that with the death of Aaron and the passing of the torch to his son. Moses is supposed to be working with Joshua, building him up and doing all of those different things. But the chapter starts in a very interesting way to me. Somebody read Numbers 20 and verse 1.
In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. There, Miriam died and was buried.
Okay, who is Miriam? This is Moses and Aaron's sister, and she just gets this brief little blurb in one verse that she dies and is buried in the wilderness. Now, this makes sense because she would be a part of that generation that's going to fall, okay? But this is the only place where we get Miriam's death even really talked about. And so you go and you look at what commentators say, and everybody knows that the wise man goes and reads commentaries to understand what the scriptures are teaching. You guys want to take a guess at how many commentators actually said something about Mary's death? 0. I found 0 commentary on Miriam's death here. In Numbers chapter 20. And so while it is a very quick mention, Moses mentions it very quickly and almost in passing as he's writing it, I'm convinced that Miriam's death plays a very large part in the rest of that chapter. So Miriam dies, and almost immediately what comes up out of the people? Starting in verse 2, what? Come on, you didn't even have to really read the chapter to know what Israelites are going to do when I ask that question. They whine and complain, right? They whine and complain to Moses. Moses does what Moses did, okay? Anytime the people complained to Moses, what was Moses' basic order of operations? What did he always do anytime there was a complaint or there was a rebellion? What did Moses always do?
He prayed.
He prayed. He went to God. He went to God to get the answer. What's that?
See what your people are doing now?
Right. And what is the source of complaint now in Numbers 20? No water. Is this the first time they've complained about no water? No. It's at least the second time that we have a record of them complaining where there's no water. The Israelites are fantastic at complaining. They complain about not having water, not having food, not having meat, not having proper leadership. All of these complaints are things that Moses has had to deal with in the first 19 chapters of Numbers that we've worked our way through. Has Moses handled all of those complaints, all of the rebellions in a godly way? Why do you say that? Minus this one. All the ones previous.
Well, he was always mad about it.
Well, Okay, there was the anger. Moses has a little bit of an anger issue. He's mad about it, okay?
But even when he was angry, he prayed about it before he dealt with the people.
Okay. Did he handle it, let's just say, when it was all said and done, did we look back at Moses and say, yeah, he handled that really well. He handled that pretty well. It came out successfully for the Lord on that. Because Moses, if he has any experience in anything leading the nation of Israel, what does he have a lot of experience in? Complaining people.
Listening to complaints.
Listening to complaints.
He was the judge for the entire people.
And his father-in-law called him off and said, hey, you're going to wear yourself and the people out. Right? And he brings in some more helpers to help him with that. Okay? Moses, I'm making this point on purpose. Moses has had to deal with complaint after complaint after complaint after complaint, and he's always followed a specific order of operation in dealing with the complaints and rebellions. All right? So he goes to God. They're complaining. They don't have any water. So what does God tell him to do? I want you to go talk to this rock, and water will come forth.
Take your rod and go talk to the rock.
Yeah, go talk to the rock. Now, has Moses drawn water out of a rock previously? Yes. But what was God's command for that time? Smack it, right? Hit the rock and water will come forth. This time God says, speak to the rock. Moses gathers the people, and I know that we've talked about in great detail in the past, and we're not going to go too much into it tonight, that Moses and Aaron take this miracle upon themselves. They don't treat God as holy as they're bringing the people to the rock, and they take credit for bringing forth water. Remember, Moses says, come here, you rebels, shall we bring water from this rock? And he smacks the rock, and water comes out. God's going to get water to the people, but he'll also deal with Moses and Aaron's treatment of him, that he was not treated as holy. He proves himself holy by providing the water to the people. He proves himself holy in not letting Moses and Aaron's mistreatment of him go without being dealt with. And that's how I see God proving himself as holy through all of this. And then we get a little bit of an interlude where they're going to start moving north, and they come to the land of the Edomites. And real quick, who are the Edomites related to? Esau. Because what does Edom actually mean? Red people. Red people. Yes, ma'am.
Verse 12
Yes.
is where I get my question discussed, which is said, and the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given you.
Okay. You guys hear what she said? Verse 12 talking about when God says, because you didn't treat me as holy, you're not going to bring this people into the promised land. I think this is just another verification that there wasn't any getting out of that initial decree to begin with. If Moses had any questions about it, they were put to rest right here.
Well,
Go ahead, Mark.
I think there's more to gain from that, in that it was Moses and Aaron's attitude toward their lack of humility,
I agree.
pride, and God says to them, because of your lack of humility, your pride, you don't, and not giving me the honor, you don't get to go in. So, to me, this is the point at which Moses and Aaron get really kind of, their doom is now sealed, because God.
Without question. Without question. At this point, they're definitely not getting in. If there was a question in their minds that they might be able to, that's done at this point. Daniel, go ahead.
I think there's an interesting glimpse into the character of God in this story right here, where Moses and Aaron, they kind of undercut God's authority, and they hit the rock and they said, we're going to bring you water, and God lets water come forth. Now, God could have very easily said, you didn't do it the way I told you to, and he's done this before. You didn't do it the way I told you to, exactly the way I told it to you, nothing happens. If God had done that, you can imagine maybe where the people would have been as far as rebellion goes if Moses and Aaron had stood up there and said, we're going to bring you water, thunk, nothing happens. Then the people have lost all faith in Moses and Aaron, and everybody kind of goes their way.
Sure.
And God doesn't allow that to happen. It almost to me it looks like, he doesn't put his ego on the line there. He says, I'm gonna let you let this slide for a minute, and I'm gonna deal with you, but we're gonna deal with the issue at hand. We're gonna bring forth the water, and I'm gonna preserve your authority with the people, but I'm gonna deal with you in my hand.
And I think too, God still is going to be gracious toward the people that He's providing for, even though Moses and Aaron were disobedient. So there's the grace aspect of it that's also being presented in God's character through all of this, in spite of Moses and Aaron's behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And another thing that you see here is the Lord does not deal with Moses and Aaron in front of the assembly.
Sure.
That when he has them aside and says, this is why you won't go. This, you didn't, but he doesn't usurp their authority from the people.
Sure. Okay. So King of Edom will not let Israel through. All right? So there's an issue there. They make a little roundabout way. They make it up to Mount Hor. God says, I need you to take Aaron and Eleazar up onto the mountain. This is where Aaron is going to die. Eleazar is going to receive the high priesthood so that he can be the high priest for the people as they're going to be entering into the land of Canaan. And Aaron dies by the end of chapter 20. Now, I think that Numbers chapter 20 is tragic. There's a lot of tragedy going on in this chapter, okay? In various levels, I think we see a ton of tragedy happening through all of this. But what makes it tragic, I think, to me, and we talked about this already, is Moses and Aaron's sin. This is what makes it tragic. Miriam has been a little bit of a thorn in the side to Moses through the course of the wilderness journeys. Her death is just, like I say, it's a blip on the radar, but what really gathers our attention is Moses and Aaron's sin and the consequence of that sin, namely, they're not going to enter into the promised land for certain now, and they're going to die, and Aaron dies quite quickly after it. But I want to take it a little bit deeper for the rest of our time. And please don't misunderstand me, okay? I don't think Moses was perfect, all right? I don't think that at all. Yeah, we could make lots of arguments that prove Moses was not perfect. But here's the question that I kept coming back to. Why now does Moses not treat God as holy, when in every other instance of complaint and rebellion, yeah, he may have been angry. He may have had some questions for God in all of this. But why now does he stumble and fall in this way? What do you guys think?
I think he was probably tired.
You think he was just sick and tired of people?
Well, not even sick and tired of people. I think he was probably just mentally and physically exhausted. And, he buried his sister.
Okay.
He's been bringing the people through. This has to be wearying on a person. And I just picture him at this point. How old is he now?
What is Moses now, 120? 120, is that right? Yeah, around it, give or take a few years, yeah.
I imagine he's wore out.
Okay, anybody else? Daniel says he's worn out, he's tired. He mentioned he just buried Miriam. Why now? Somebody read for us Psalm 106, 32 and 33. Psalm 106, 32 and 33.
They also provoked him to wrath at the waters of Meribah, so that it went hard with Moses on their account. Because they were rebellious against his spirit, he spoke rashly with his lips.
All right, so this is Chris kind of was talking about pronouns a couple of weeks ago in Sunday morning class, where we've got to start trying to figure out who the his and he is through all of this. But when you look at 32, they provoked him to wrath at the waters of Meribah. That would be God. That him is God. They provoked God to wrath. So because they provoked God's wrath, it went hard with Moses. And because they were rebellious against God's spirit, and Moses recognizes this, Moses will then speak rashly with his lips. Does anybody have a different translation there than speaks rashly? Say again, George. Unadvised. That's fantastic. That is fantastic. In his anger, because I think he was angry, in his tiredness, he spoke unadvisedly. He spoke rashly when he and Aaron were standing there before the rock. But I want it, so we have anger and tiredness. I'll get you in a second. That we can add to that equation. Loss of patience, let's throw that one in there too. I think that could be part of all of these things, because let's just be upfront on this one, guys. Do we speak rashly when we're completely patient? Not
as much.
We stop, we think things through. We don't, end up with foot and mouth disease. Right? I'll get you in a second, Kathy, after we get Mark. But then I also think we need to add in grief to the equation. How many of us have lost siblings? We know the pain that we deal with during that, right? And the weight that it puts on us. I think that this Miriam died and was buried there needs not to be ignored when we're looking at the failure that occurs in the rest of that, in the following verses in that chapter. I think we need to throw all of those things together. All right, Mark, and then we'll get Kat.
That's never happened to any of us.
Never.
I have never said anything hateful or spiteful while being angry. Yes, I have. Maybe that's why God said, be angry and sin.
And don't sin. Yeah. Kathy?
Well, I was just gonna say, it goes to the Greek, because they had already mentioned Miriam, but now those kids, of the ones he brought out, that we're supposed to teach those kids all about God and their generation, now he's got their children doing the same.
Yeah, and that's got to grieve him on another level. Yeah, I'll agree with you on that one. And let's just be upfront on this. Whose fault is Moses and Aaron's sin? Moses and Aaron. That's whose fault it is. Do they get to lay their sin on anybody else? Do they get to go to God and say, you know what, God, those people that boy, this is going to sound very familiar, those people that you gave me to lead out of Egypt, they provoked me and I sinned. So it's really your fault. Moses, that's what Adam did in the garden, right?
The wife you gave me.
That woman you gave me, Adam tries to flip the script and blame God for his sin. And what does God do in that whole conversation with the man and the woman in the garden? Whose fault is their sin? Theirs. They own that, all right? So we know that Moses and Aaron's sin is all on Moses and Aaron. Okay, we know that. Do we agree with that? We all agree with that, right? This is all on them. Now here's the question. Jay, will go ahead before I ask the question.
Just having trouble correcting my mom, but it's probably pretty confusing to them. Does that make them their whole life putting their sin on other things?
Well, but in Leviticus, those sins would be transferred to the animals. Right. The priest would lay, but they still had to bear the responsibility of bringing that sacrifice on an individual basis, or even on the Day of Atonement.
Right. Once they brought it, put it there, offered it, it was gone.
It was gone, or pushed forward until they sinned again, and then they had to bring another sacrifice.
There used to be just pushing forward, but God just says, look,
We're done.
you're done. There's no pushing this forward.
Yep.
But it wasn't out of their mind.
Right, they still had that, that's what the Hebrew writer says, right? That continual reminder of sin was always there. But they were still held individually responsible for their individual sin. Now, if they sinned as a nation, the nation would bear the brunt or bear the burden of that sin. But each individual still has to bear that responsibility and the consequence that comes from that sin.
Look at David with the sin
Oh, sure.
And then God said, I'm going to give you your choice of consequences. You know, he might move that sin off the side, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be a consequence of that sin that you have to deal with in an earthly time frame. You know, that ultimate consequence of sin, that and the sin itself may be gone, but there are still ramifications of what you've done that you can't escape.
True. That's fair. And we could go on a lengthy rabbit trail on that one, which we're not going to. So we know that Moses and Aaron are responsible for their sin. But here's the question that I had. Anybody help them on the way? They're making the choice. Don't misunderstand me. But did anybody help them on the way?
Why did he tell them to bring the stick?
I don't know. That I don't have an answer for, Otis.
Stick's important. He told him to bring the stick when he first went to Egypt.
What's that?
He got to carry the stick with him. He got told to bring it when he first went back.
Well,
Don't
Cr-
forget your stick.
Chris?
I think I take maybe a different view from you.
Go ahead, yeah.
Let's take a passage we're familiar with. God is not a respecter of
Persons.
persons.
Yep.
And you just said it, when a nation, or people sin, which we know Moses and Aaron were sinners, okay? So when we have the prophecy that that generation is going to go through, it was talking about Israel,
Mm-hmm.
which included them, except for the exception.
Right.
So, I mean, to me, that's fairly clear that they weren't going to make it, okay? But I think it's a shadow of what's to come, because we just talked about, even though they thought they were doing things right? Moses and Aaron. Well, the Sadducees and Pharisees thought they were doing the right thing.
Excellent
when they
point,
crucified
yeah.
Jesus. And when it's to accountability in the Old Testament in particular, but also in the New Testament, because it's more of a group, not necessarily as an individual. For example, if you look at the churches in Revelation, that something's going to happen to you, right? It's always because of a body. It's very seldom one person is picked out and said,
You're talking on a national level.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree, yeah.
and so I think this just shows to Israel, okay? I think this whole thing shows to them that God is not a respecter of persons.
Good, yeah.
This is what you imagined who Moses was, and the next generation that comes up, and all the generations afterwards, is not the case. We knew that Moses was going to sin. We knew that he was going to take this attitude. God knew, okay, that he was going to take this attitude. He knew that Aaron was going to take the attitude, and this is why. Because he still was part of the sinful generation.
Agreed, yeah.
And so I think
That's an interesting, I hadn't thought of it in the way you presented of the respecter of persons aspect on it, because it's Moses,
yeah.
for crying out loud. I mean, if anybody was going to make it to the promised land, it should have been him, right? But because of that decree, it doesn't.
Hebrews 11.
And then when you go to Hebrews 11, those people we expect to make it, and those we don't expect to make it, because it's a whole different reason.
Right, and that they're waiting on those promises yet to come. Go ahead, Daniel, and we're going to get into the application section of this, is where I'm trying to get us to.
God would, continuously through this time reinforce Moses and Aaron's authority.
Oh, we saw it
in this
last week.
situation. But even saying that, these guys are in charge and I am speaking through them, so listen to them. When you tack that on with what Chris is saying, even when God puts you in a position of authority like that, you're still a part of that body.
Sure,
You're fulfilling your role.
Well, even Jesus kept the law.
correct.
It was, at that time,
Was that seriously the first bell? Because I have like 20 more minutes.
It was wrong.
We're gonna run a little late tonight. I'm just gonna give you guys heads up on that. Okay. Getting into my point, I asked the question, who helped him out along the way to make that sinful choice easier? Because I want to submit something to you. A stumbling block is not an issue to someone who is not in a weakened state. Does that make sense? A stumbling block is not an issue to someone who is strong. And we've been hiking before, right? Do you trip on the little pebbles in the first 20 minutes of the hike? When do you, well, except for Kathy. When do we normally find ourselves struggling with footing, struggling with exhaustion? When we're tired, when we've been on the road for a while. And so I hear your point on the tired aspect, the patience aspect, the anger aspect, the grief aspect. I think Moses is in a weakened state here. That's why we see him not treating God as holy. Stumbling blocks were put in front of him, and because he was weakened, I'm not saying Moses was weak, but because he was weakened, he stumbles. And we could talk all day about Moses and Aaron, and we'd love to. But what I'd like for us to finish off the thought with is, how seriously do we take Jesus' warnings in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 7? What does that one say? Now remember, Moses and Aaron are responsible for their own personal choices here. But the people sure made it a whole lot easier for them to act a fool. What does Jesus say in Matthew 18 and verse 7?
Woe to the world because of offenses. The offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offenses come.
Offenses, anybody got anything different than offenses? New American Standard has a different word.
Stumbling blocks.
Stumbling blocks. Woe to the one who puts a stumbling block in front of someone who's in a weakened state and they fall. Israel was fantastic at throwing stumbling blocks in front of Moses. And he could sidestep them and he could work them quite a bit. But when he's weak is when we see him not treat God as holy. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, Romans chapter 14, we won't have time to get into those, but those deal with some very practical matters of behavior toward one another. And if we're looking at the scriptures, and these are here for our instruction, for our learning, that we're supposed to actually be gaining something, I think that we've got that whole treat God as holy thing hammered out pretty well. But do we recognize the other side of things? And how well do we know our brothers and the state that they find themselves in? And are we working to strengthen them out of that weakened state? Or are we willing to just throw a bunch of pebbles and rocks and blocks down in front of them just to see if they're going to trip? Or just ignore it. And I think when we're looking at it from a purely application standpoint, we need to be paying attention more to what the people of Israel are doing, at least tonight. Did they know that Moses' sister had just died? Did they know that Moses has been dealing with rebellion and complaints for a long time? Did Moses take it personally when they complained?
Yes.
Why did Moses take it personally?
Because they were complaining against him.
And against God. It would wear on any man. What's that, Kathy? And he's old, right? Kind of like Bill. Kind of grumpy.
You know, I look at Moses from the beginning. What did he tell God at the very beginning? I can't do this.
Well, he had plenty of excuses, yeah.
And he said, well, I'll give you Aaron. So, Moses was already saying, had a little negative attitude towards this whole thing at the beginning. So I look at him, when he goes to that rock the second time, and God tells him, well, take the staff, God's telling him, remember, you've done this before. But now, not with the staff, but you've done this before.
Right.
And the people recognized that this had been done before, so to me, it's like the people were expecting Moses to hit that rock, so he gave it to him.
Maybe.
I mean, that's just Bill Brookhart looking at that as a picture.
Yeah.
Because Moses was not, to me, at the very beginning, Moses, you're going to that before in other stories. You're going to lead my people. No, I'm not. Yeah, you are. And he led them. But he did not make it to the promised land because of disobedience.
Well, disobedience of the people prior.
Right.
But I'm convinced, guys, that if Moses had not been in a weakened state, I don't think he would have stumbled. That doesn't change the fact of him getting into the promised land or not.
Right.
It really doesn't, because he already knows he's not making it into the promised land. But I'm convinced that it's because he's in this state that he fails so tragically here in the story. Yeah, because it's in this state when he fails, not only does he fail, but the people see the failure and they fail also. And I think that we need to be really just looking at this concept of stumbling blocks in terms of how we deal with each other through all of this. Do we strengthen each other? Do we know what we're going through so that we can strengthen and be the source of encouragement for someone? Or do we just not care and we're just going to go about willy-nilly and do our own thing, which is, by the way, what Paul deals with in 1 Corinthians and Romans. We've got to be able to work together through all of these different things. And that's what I was hoping we could take from application out of Numbers chapter 20 tonight. You know your brother's struggling. Don't make it more difficult for him. What's that, Kathy? And don't ignore it. Be there for them. Now, this story has already been written. Numbers has already been written. Ours is being written as we live it. And I'm sure that we could look back at times in our lives where we found ourselves more like the people of Israel than we care to admit. But that's not the end of our story, at least not yet. The Lord hasn't returned and we're still breathing air. So we're able to take the lessons, be encouraged by them, and be better for it as we move forward in the kingdom. That was the second bell. So we're going to have a song. Thank you guys for your attention and comments tonight. I really enjoy the conversation. I think we get more out of the scriptures. I think we learn better when we're in conversation around these things. So for next week, encourage you guys to read 21 through 25 in preparation for study and discussion. But we're going to have a song, When He Comes in Glory by and by. And Daniel is going to be leading us in closing prayer.
Oh, how sweet 'twill be to meet the Lord when He comes in glory by and by. What a song of praise will be outpoured when He comes in glory by and by. How sweet 'twill be, how sweet 'twill be when He comes again in the lovely sky. What joy 'twill be, what joy 'twill be when He comes in glory by and by. We will have our robes all white as snow when He comes in glory by and by. Oh, be ready with the Lord to go when He comes in glory by and by. How sweet 'twill be, how sweet 'twill be when He comes again in the lovely sky. What joy 'twill be, what joy 'twill be when He comes in glory by and by. I am longing for that happy day when He comes in glory by and by. For with Him I hope to soar away when He comes in glory by and by. How sweet 'twill be, how sweet 'twill be when He comes again in the lovely sky. What joy 'twill be, what joy 'twill be when He comes in glory by and by. How sweet 'twill be, how sweet 'twill be when He comes again in the lovely sky. What joy